Giovanni Bernard in for the first time today. Dalton quick pass near side. Pass is complete. It's Ross. He fumbled the ball, and the Bills pick it up. Dalton under center off the play fake. Throws to the near side. Pass is intercepted at the 39-yard line. Trey White. He stepped in front of Boyd, and he was able to take it off the top of the turf. Roy Reynolds in the game for Cincinnati at black.
What's happening, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thanks for hopping on here on the show. Wanted to show a little bit of some highlights from last season to pump up the volume on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in on tonight's show. A lot to discuss. Of course, I greatly appreciate the love and support from each and every member of Bills Mafia, whether you're from Buffalo, whether you're from Wisconsin, Florida, no matter where you are. I appreciate you guys tuning in and submitting your questions and letting me know, hey, how are you feeling about this Buffalo Bills season coming up? Obviously, it's a 17-game season. A lot to discuss as we inch closer and closer to training camp. Most importantly, I love to do these top 5 lists, and I put a top 5 out, and I'm really excited about it. Excited to unveil it. And, here's some of your comments. So let's get right to it. This show is sponsored by none other than my favorite brewing company, none other than Labatt Blue. Labatt Blue, Blue Light, Labatt Blue Seltzer. The lemonade seltzer is amazing. I love it. I was able to dabble in a little bit of those on the golf course, and what a great golf beverage that is for me to partake in, and I suggest you guys try those new seltzers as well. I got a variety pack, so I had a little bit of mix of everything, and that's always nice. Labatt Blue Brewing Company, sponsor of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I want to fire off have you guys fire off your comments in the comment section if you're tuning in on YouTube or if you're tuning in on any of the audio platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, you name it. Let me know what you think on my Twitter, at Ryan Thomas Take. I really appreciate hearing from all of you and interacting with each member of Bills Mafia. It's a great time to be a Bills fan. Last season was an amazing season. This one's going to be even better now that fans are allowed back in the stands where they belong, and we'll have the opportunity to see one of the best teams in the National Football League do part in this season, take part and try to take over this season. So the subject matter at hand, of course, is Ryan Thomas's top 5 favorite Buffalo Bills offseason additions. Who are the 5 players that I really enjoy the fact that the Bills brought them in? 5 players I'm excited about, the 5 players that have me pumped up for this upcoming Buffalo Bills season. And I'm going to go from 5 to 1, 1 to 5. Nobody, I won't even go there. We'll go from 5 to 1. I was going to quote the Doors, but I decided not to. I'm no Jim Morrison. I thought I would do that, but I thought, no, better not. Better not go that route. But let's start with number 5. And I put number 5 in this list as an important number, even though it's a top 5. The 5th spot to me is worthy of being in consideration as a top 5 roster add for this Buffalo Bills team. And I am going to go with the backup quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, not Mitch Trubisky, Mitchell Trubisky. Mitchell Trubisky in the second stop of his National Football League career. The first stop didn't go according to plan. It's safe to say it didn't go according to plan. First 4 years in Chicago did not really go as well as, what was dreamed up by the Bears brass. They've moved on from Mitchell Trubisky. They're in the Justin Fields era now. Mitchell Trubisky now looking to somewhat push the reset button, I should say, on his National Football League career with a unique opportunity to come to a team on a 1-year deal. The expectations for Mitch to really do a whole lot are very low. Hopefully, God willing, Josh Allen is healthy for all 17 games of this upcoming regular season for the Buffalo Bills. And we won't have to rely on Mitch Trubisky whatsoever. We won't even have to say, hey, Mitch Trubisky is a factor or was a factor this season. I hope we don't have to say that. I mean, things went according to plan for the Buffalo Bills. But from the perspective of offseason additions, Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, they look at the team with a wide lens and say, where do we need to get better? What stone do we leave unturned first? What's something that we could go after that would help us if, in fact, we found ourselves in a peculiar situation with Josh Allen out, new quarterback comes in? Who would that guy be that we could rely on and say, hey, this guy, we feel safe that this guy could win us, 3 games out of 4 or 2 games out of 3 or 2 games out of 4. Matt Barkley just simply wasn't that guy. And we know how important Josh Allen is to this Buffalo Bills roster. He's an MVP caliber quarterback. He's played at that level last season. He arguably should have been the most valuable player last year if it wasn't for a guy by the name of Aaron Rodgers. But without that near MVP caliber quarterback in your lineup, God forbid he were to get hurt, I think Mitchell Trubisky made a ton of sense for this team. And I think it was a really nice addition. When I first saw that Mitchell Trubisky was signed to the Buffalo Bills, I thought, I didn't really like it at first. Sitting there eating lunch with some friends, Bills signed Mitchell Trubisky, what? But the more I thought about it, I thought, I wanted the Bills to go after a better backup quarterback. Mitchell Trubisky was 29-21 as a starter in a Chicago Bears uniform. Mitch Trubisky's numbers, not great, but not terrible. Mitchell Trubisky not brought back by Chicago. It was better for both sides to move on. Did the Chicago Bears do their due diligence in making sure that Mitch Trubisky was coming into the greatest situation possible by building around him? No, they did not. They did not pull a Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott a la with Josh Allen by bringing in offensive linemen, bringing in veteran wide receivers like Cole Beasley and John Brown, bringing in Stephon Diggs. Those things didn't happen for Mitch Trubisky in Chicago. Patchwork offensive line, very limited run game, a very injury-prone run game with David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen. Not a whole lot there in terms of on-the-field production. We know those guys can compete there in Chicago, but they were just not healthy. And the defense is great, but without an offensive line to protect your young investment, you're not really going anywhere. So Mitch Trubisky picked the right team in his second stop to say, hey, I'm going to bet on myself for a year, learn under this really solid coaching staff that has created something special here, and also pick Josh Allen's brain a little bit. How did Josh Allen go from being on the outside looking in his first 2 years to being one of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League in year 3? I'm sure Mitchell Trubisky is in Josh Allen's ear and will be in Josh Allen's ear plenty this season. So that, for me, is the 5th best move that the Bills made this offseason. Granted, it's a backup that hopefully more likely than not, won't even play it down for the Buffalo Bills. But just to have the security of having an experienced quarterback as your backup that's young, that has started a lot of games in this league, that has won a lot of games in this league, a lot more games in this league for a backup. You got some backups out there that are backup quarterbacks that have barely started 5 or 6 games. Mitch Trubisky started seasons. So that's a huge advantage for the Buffalo Bills in terms of depth. The 4th favorite addition of mine, Bills brought in, is an addition that everybody's going to say, well, is this really that solid of an addition? I think it was. I think that this move made a ton of sense for a run game that has a lot of question marks. I follow the team as closely as anyone. I know that there's a lot of people that follow the team closely, but I follow the team closely in my own way. And I really could not give you a clear-cut answer as to who the RB1 is of the Buffalo Bills. I lean towards Devin Singletary. I like Devin Singletary a lot. I think he hasn't even scratched the surface of his potential. I also wanted Zach Moss very badly for this Buffalo Bills team. They picked him at the pick I thought they would, 3rd round, in last year's draft, not this past year, but last year's draft, of course. They left a little bit to be desired. So with that mindset of, we know who we have with Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, but we need to add somebody to that mix that can be a positive force, whether it's his veteran capability, leadership, you name it. This guy has also largely not scratched the surface of his full potential. And to me, the Bills addition of Matt Breida is an addition that I really like. One of my favorite moves, because Matt Breida provides a different dimension to your offense that you simply didn't have last year. You had 2 very young, very raw running backs in Singletary and Moss that have a ton of talent. Very, I guess you could say, patchwork offensive line just in terms of the depth, the lack of depth that the Bills offensive line had last year. The Bills added to that this season in the draft especially. But Matt Breida, to me, is a guy that I thought San Francisco would never get rid of. I know they have a loaded backfield, but I didn't think that they'd ever get rid of him. They did. Goes to Miami for a 5th-round draft choice. I thought that was a steal for Miami. And yet, Matt Breida doesn't end up, really doing a whole lot for Miami. I thought for sure that Matt Breida would do a lot for Miami. I was actually kind of worried about that addition for Miami, but Miami had some young running backs that came out of the woodwork that did their thing, and Matt Breida was kind of forced out of the depth chart, out of town, essentially. They let him go, didn't really do a whole lot there, and that was that. One and done for Matt Breida and the Miami Dolphins. But I think if Brian Daboll could look at the film and check the film and see where could the Bills add new dimensions to this offense that they just simply didn't have in 2020. Matt Breida is a part of that. Matt Breida is a part of how can we make this offense different. I would say Matt Breida is one of those guys that could drastically help make this offense look a little bit different, just in terms of the looks that we provided the defense, in terms of what we could do with Matt Breida in certain packages. He has the capabilities to be used in a wide variety of ways that were not available to the Buffalo Bills last season offensively. And you have to be different each and every year offensively. We can't go into it this upcoming season, I should say, and think that we're just going to run the same offense again and it's going to work. Because right now, every team out there is looking at what the hell did Buffalo do to get from point A to point B? What did they do to make Josh Allen, a perennial MVP contender? How did they do it? And how are we going to stop it? Especially the teams in the AFC East. They're looking at how did the Buffalo Bills go from point A to point B, 2019 to 2020. Obviously, Stephon Diggs had a lot to say about it and a lot to do with it. But in what ways can Buffalo internally change the offense, make the offense more prolific? I think Matt Breida should be a part of that discussion. And I think he will be. It's not to say that Matt Breida is going to take Devin Singletary's job or Zach Moss. I think Singletary and Moss are still the 2 running backs on this roster, and rightfully so. But I think Matt Breida can play a part as well. So for that, I have Matt Breida as my 4th favorite offseason addition for the Buffalo Bills. Gregory Rousseau, my 3rd favorite offseason addition. Now, Gregory Rousseau, I'm on a draft show. I was on the Built in Buffalo draft show, and I said, okay, looking at this pick here, who do I think they could take? Could be a defensive end, could be a corner, could be an offensive lineman. They could have gone in a lot of different directions, and that's a good problem to have. It's a problem that you have when you're a good team picking in the late 20s. You don't have those gaping hole needs because you were able to go 13-3 last year, make it to the AFC title game. You don't have the obvious needs that you are accustomed to having in years past, where we needed a running back, we needed a quarterback, we needed a wide receiver. Those days are long gone. Gregory Rousseau gets drafted in the 1st round, and you look at it and say, okay, the Bills, we know that the older position on their roster is the defensive end position. You have a older, long in the tooth Mario Addison, and Jerry Hughes is coming up on some, the later years of his career here. So we drafted A.J. Epinesa in the second round last year. We draft Gregory Rousseau in the first round this year. What makes Gregory Rousseau such an intriguing first-round talent level player? It's all physical. It's all the ability to have the length, to have the distance, creativity that Gregory Rousseau has due to the long, unique frame that he has. And not only can, Gregory Rousseau create distance contact with that length, he can close it pretty quickly. And you look at that and say 6'7", 260 pounds at the collegiate level. I've talked about this before on the show. 6'7", 260 at the collegiate level. Could he get up to 275, 280 and carry more weight and not lose the speed that he has? If those things can happen, we don't know yet if those things can happen. But if those things can happen, Gregory Rousseau is probably one of the more underrated first-round draft choices in this last year's draft. And it's a pick that Bills Mafia was not too excited about. I can't say I was over the moon with it, but I can say that it's a position that definitely needed a new piece to the puzzle. Whether we had drafted A.J. Epinesa or not, you can never have too many pass rushers in this league, especially when you have a quarterback by the name of Pat Mahomes that you're trying to bring down, and Baker Mayfield included, Lamar Jackson included, all guys that have the ability to extend plays within the offense that they play in. Whether it's Lamar, whether it's Baker, whether it's Pat Mahomes, they all have that unique talent. So let's bring in as many Swiss Army knife pass rushers as possible to give the opposing offense different looks and to create new looks on our defense. And I don't think Leslie Frazier has ever been this excited heading into a season, ever, as a defensive coach, as a coach in the National Football League. He has a lot of new toys that he can play with in Gregory Rousseau, as well as my number 2 favorite offseason addition, Boogie Basham. Now, Boogie Basham, I'm rating him ahead of Gregory Rousseau as my favorite offseason addition, second favorite, to Rousseau being my third favorite, due in large part to the fact that Gregory Rousseau, to what I talked about with his physicality, wanting him to get a little bit bigger in terms of his weight, Boogie Basham's already there. Boogie Basham already has a quote-unquote NFL body. It's just a matter of becoming accustomed to Sean McDermott's style of play, style of defense, where you have constant rotation in the front 7, particularly in the front 4, and you have to be ready. You have to be on your toes when your number's called, to come out. I don't think Boogie Basham's really experienced that. I think he's experienced that, but not obviously at this level. So it'll be very interesting to see how Boogie Basham translates from Wake Forest to Buffalo in that regard. Hand in the dirt, of course, solid pass rusher, nose for the football, very smart football player, awareness off the charts. I think X's and O's wise, you won't find a rookie coming into this league, especially at a front 4 position, that is as aware of the speed of the game, that is as aware of where he is supposed to be in his role within a defense, the way Boogie Basham will be aware of that. And that's why I'm very excited, not just for Rousseau, but for Boogie Basham. More excited, in fact, for Boogie Basham than I am for Gregory Rousseau. And that's not a slight on Rousseau. I'm excited for both. But I think Boogie Basham is just a little bit ahead of him in terms of that transition. Based on physically, he's already there. He's already at that point where he needs to be, physically to make that transition. So to recap the list of my top 5 favorite Buffalo Bills offseason additions before I give you the number 1 addition here. Number 5 is backup quarterback Mitchell Trubisky, former second or third overall pick in the draft a few years back up to Josh Allen. Number 4 be Matt Breida. I like what he brings to this offense in terms of the looks that he provides with the Buffalo Bills offensively. Some differences there, of course. Number 3, Gregory Rousseau, first-round draft choice this year. If he can get a little bit bigger, bulkier, weight-wise, I really like what he brings to the table physically with his long, unique length, 6'7", tall guy, and especially obviously 6'7", but long arms as well, creating that distance with those long arms. And of course, number 2, Boogie Basham, who I already feel like has that NFL body and might be a little bit ahead of Rousseau in terms of how he can transition to the NFL, being that he has that body type. Number 1, last and certainly not least, my number 1 favorite Buffalo Bills offseason edition is none other than veteran wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders. I'm going to tell you why Emmanuel Sanders is my favorite Buffalo Bills offseason edition. Last season, the Bills had, of course, a prolific offense. Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley. John Brown was a part of that. He was definitely a factor in that. When healthy, he was a factor. But the key words were when healthy. And I think John Brown's injury last year was something that created new opportunity for other players on this roster, created new opportunities to see guys like Cole Beasley almost get that 1,000-yard receiving mark, create new opportunities for Josh Allen to make plays even with his legs, create new opportunities, more opportunities for Stephon Diggs. I don't think Stephon Diggs would have had the season that he had if Brown was healthier. And, you know, it's not to say that it's a bad thing that Stephon Diggs was so heavily relied upon, but in a way, I think this season the Bills have more trusted balance within their offense than what they had before. You can talk about that trusted balance factor within the new depth that they have on the offensive line. Some guys that can run block better than years past. Some guys that can be rotated in and out better than in years past on the offensive line side of things. But getting a player like Emmanuel Sanders to fit in with the not mentioned yet Gabe Davis, who was able to make his own impact. Emmanuel Sanders is a true pros pro. He's played with guys like Drew Brees, Big Ben Roethlisberger, Peyton Manning, Jimmy Garoppolo, will throw him in there as well. Emmanuel Sanders has been everywhere, man. He is the Johnny Cash, you know, I've been everywhere wide receiver of the National Football League. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in this case. When you can go from team to team and be relied upon within a specific role and play well within that role, that makes you dependable. That makes you a serviceable player within this league. Did he find a home? Was he good enough to be a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 1? No, but that's not what Emmanuel Sanders is geared towards. He is geared towards being a player that can come in, play that specific slot, you know, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 in certain packages, role-playing wide receiver, and he is as sure-handed a wide receiver as just about anybody in the National Football League. And he is dependable and durable. Am I going to call Emmanuel Sanders an upgrade from John Brown? Maybe not skill set-wise. John Brown is faster. John Brown provided us with that streaky wide receiver that could just run down the seam of the field and Josh Allen could find him on a deep ball. But I think the Bills already have that guy, and his name is Gabe Davis. I think what Emmanuel Sanders will do for this offense is provide more protection for a guy like also Gabe Davis and a guy like Stephon Diggs as well as Cole Beasley. How Emmanuel Sanders will fit in this offense will be in a completely complementary way. I throw that out there in terms of what he brings to the Bills on the field. I haven't even mentioned what he brings to the Bills off the field. The leadership oozes out of a guy like Emmanuel Sanders. We've heard about it from guys like Peyton Manning. We've heard about it from every quarterback, every running back, every other wide receiver that Emmanuel Sanders has played with can attest to that Emmanuel Sanders is a natural-born leader. And I think this offense needs those guys that know what it takes to get from the AFC Championship game to a Super Bowl. Emmanuel Sanders has played in a few of them. So I love this move. I've loved it since the moment I heard about it. I think that This is a guy that to me, I think there's still more to be seen there. These last few years have been down years for Emmanuel Sanders, but now he's with this young, rocket-armed quarterback. He hasn't played with a guy quite like Josh Allen. I'm not saying Josh Allen's Peyton Manning. I'm not saying he's Big Ben, but in terms of the type of quarterback that Josh Allen is, Emmanuel Sanders has never played with a quarterback that can move the way Josh Allen can. That's exciting to me. That's why I have Emmanuel Sanders as my favorite Buffalo Bills offseason addition. Some of them were draft picks. Rousseau, Basham, first and second round draft choice. Those ones were obvious to throw in there. Matt Breida, a new wrinkle to the offense. Mitch Trubisky, God forbid if Josh Allen goes out, I do feel comfortable with Mitch Trubisky coming in and playing, 2-3 games if need be. Any more than that, we're in trouble. I'll throw that out there. Emmanuel Sanders, though, veteran, can right the ship if things do go wrong in certain aspects of the season. It's a longer season, 17 weeks of a National Football League season. I'm not really a fan of that personally, but hey, more football, I guess it's not a bad thing. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, sponsored by Labatt Blue. This is my top 5 favorite Buffalo Bills offseason editions episode. I will also end the show with my favorite portion of the show, and it is answering your questions that you submitted to me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. Start off with the first one. The first question is about the Buffalo Sabres. I did a long show on the Buffalo Sabres. Comments, I'm reading them. People want me to talk about the Sabres. I'm hoping, in terms of their head coaching situation, I'm asked, who do I want as the head coach of the Sabres? I'm hoping that they stick with Donnie G. I hope that they stick with Donnie G. I liked what Donnie Meatballs was able to do with Casey Middlestat, with Dylan Cousins, with Tage Thompson. Let's face it, this is the new young core of the Sabres. It's looking like Eichel's a goner. It's looking like Sam Reinhart's a goner. It's looking like Rasmus Ristolainen, another goner. New core, sharpen your swords. Donnie Granato coming in to Seymour Knox Plaza to galvanize the young talent that we have had on this team for a long time. We've continuously had young talent. That's one thing you can say about the Sabres. They've continuously had young talent the last 10 years. It's time to galvanize that talent, sharpen that talent, and get ready. Also hoping that the Sabres' first and foremost priority in terms of re-signing your own players, Linus Ullmark. I want him back. I know he's had injury issues, but that is your number one goalie, in my opinion. You do have UPL Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who I'm very excited for. Michael Hauser was a nice little story there. He can go down to Rochester and hone his craft, as well as Jacob Tokarski. That's one problem that the Sabres don't have. They have 4 pretty good goalies. Who would have thought? Whether it's at the minor league level or at the NHL level, they have 4 guys that can contribute. I'm missing one, I think. I think there's another one that I'm missing. But those are some answers to some questions that I was asked. I was asked, who do I want the Sabres head coach to be? I'm all for the Donnie Granato continuation. Let's see this through. Why not? What do we got to lose? We're terrible. What do we got to lose? Can't get much worse than it is right now. Can only get better, right? And then in terms of goaltender, that's the first thing I want the That's the first thing I want the Sabres to do, is to keep Ullmark. That's the top priority for me this offseason. Keep Ullmark. So there you have it. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Once again, ending the show, answering some questions that were submitted by you, the viewers, and the listeners. Folks, subscribe to the show on YouTube. Follow the show on any podcast platform, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Google Podcasts. I'm everywhere. Audio-wise, you can find this show on any of those platforms. Greatly appreciate the support. If I didn't get to your comments now, I will online in the comments section on this video. Take care, and last, certainly not least, go Bills.